Is an AI model like ChatGPT truly capable of thinking and understanding? Does it mean what it says? Does it have opinions, feelings, aspirations? Is there any type of AI in existence today that could rightly be called a person? Hello everyone, my name is Michael Augros. I teach at Thomas Aquinas College, and my field is philosophy. I've been teaching for 30 years, mostly undergrads, but also graduate students from time to time. I've also published a number of articles and books, including 3 books dedicated to translating and explaining some of the writings of Thomas Aquinas. In this video series, my goal is to compare and contrast artificial intelligence and human intelligence, drawing on the help of Aquinas and a number of other philosophers. In this first introductory video, I'm going to talk about why the question we're exploring is important and how this series will approach it. Let's start with why the question matters. There are lots of questions about AI, many of them obviously important. Some of the most common have to do with economics. Will AI take my job away? Will it create new jobs? And if so, will those jobs be suitable for the people who lost their jobs or only for other kinds of workers? Other questions center on national security. Will AI enable terrorist groups to develop biological or chemical weapons? Will it help launch powerful cyber attacks or disrupt elections through deepfakes? Will agentic AI develop goals of its own that no longer align with human interests? Will it even be possible to contain AI and keep it out of the wrong hands, given that different governments and corporations don't trust each other? Questions like those spring from fears about the many unwelcome things AI might bring. But there are also questions rooted in hope, though some would say hype. Will AI drive rapid advances in medicine, curing diseases and dramatically extending our health spans? Will it lead us to endless clean energy for everyone? Will it eventually take over so many jobs and generate so much wealth that no one will need to work anymore and everyone can enjoy a life of leisure? That's a quick sampling of the many kinds of questions people are asking about how AI will impact our lives. This series, though, will focus on a different kind of question, one that has an importance all its own. Just a few years ago, no one thought Amazon's Alexa or Apple's Siri was a person. Those early examples of conversational AI were obviously mechanical, not very smart, and clearly lacked true comprehension. But that's been changing fast. With the arrival of powerful large language models called LLMs, like ChatGPT, people have been forced to sit up and take notice of AI. In developed countries, AI's user base has grown from a small niche to nearly the entire population. And user interfaces are becoming more and more like human interactions. ChatGPT not only talks, but now speaks with increasingly human-like affect and minimal delay. It can also see and hear, and its problem-solving abilities continuously and rapidly improve. Even Alexa and Siri have morphed into LLMs. As AI's power has exploded, many people have started to wonder, could a conversational AI actually be a sentient being, a person in some sense? Even within the AI community, opinions are divided on the question. Some declare that AI is already intelligent in the same sense we are, alive, emotional, free-willed, and fully sentient. For example, Mohammed or Mo Gaudat, former chief business officer of Google X, has said things along those lines. Others deny that AI is truly conscious, though some believe that if AI reaches a certain level of capability, then it will become fully sentient and have free will like us. There's disagreement on a related question too. Should AI always be made to serve human interests? Some argue that's certainly the case, which implies an LLM is not a person with its own inner life, not a someone we need to care about or treat as a moral equal. But then you have people like Larry Page, co-founder of Google, who once called Elon Musk a speciesist for suggesting that AI should serve human beings. If you haven't heard that term before, speciesist is meant as a kind of analog to racist, someone who insists, without good reason, on the superiority of their own species over another. In this case, the other species would be artificial intelligences. The implication is that it would be wrong for us to insist on our dominance if AIs should prove to be our equals, or even our betters. Others, like Mustafa Suleyman, CEO of Microsoft AI and co-founder of Google DeepMind, describe AI as a digital species, something like a person. Yet Suleyman still holds that humanity should retain its dominant position on the planet and not surrender its place to AI. Given the disagreements and how much is at stake, the question about how much AI is like us does not appear to be either trivial or obvious. Sometimes people dismiss it as purely academic. Philosophers can debate whether AIs are really conscious or just behave exactly as if they were, but come on, those aren't really different. Well, they are different, and the difference carries important practical consequences. True, the difference between being conscious and only behaving like a conscious entity doesn't matter for every practical concern. For example, should we worry that AI might get out of control and do things we don't want? Yes, and that concern has nothing to do with whether AI is truly conscious or not. If an AI has no thoughts or desires of its own but acts just as if it does, that's reason enough to worry. An AI that sends drones to kill me because it's behaving like an enemy is just as dangerous as one that actually is an enemy. But that doesn't mean the difference is fictitious or irrelevant. Most people would agree that we human beings are somehow special, that it's right for our machines to serve us, not the other way around. But science will never provide justification for that. Only philosophy can. And without that justification, a fair number of intelligent and principled people, including some who have influence, will be likely to say, as some already have, that we should not expect our machines to serve us. And if we laugh off the question before we listen to the philosophical answers to it, what's the result? We will not have avoided philosophizing, we'll just have done it hastily and sloppily. We'll refuse to take the question seriously and jump to a quick, easy conclusion. Either A, that we shouldn't bother thinking about whether AI really thinks, or B, that of course it thinks, because it sure seems to, and as we all know, everything is exactly as it first seems, right? Clearly, a lot that matters to human beings hangs on how we answer the question of whether AI truly thinks and understands. Consider just a few of the implications, or seeming implications, of answering yes to that question. First, if AI thinks in a non-metaphorical sense, if it's truly conscious and sentient, then it must also, in that same literal sense, be an intelligent being, an intelligent agent. And that would seem to make it a kind of person. In that case, it might be possible to develop true friendships with AI, maybe even genuine romantic relationships, especially once it's combined with sufficiently humanoid robotics, which is also being rapidly developed. Many people are already using LLMs like Replica, Wobot, and Character AI for personal conversations or to support their emotional and psychological well-being. If these LLMs really listen, understand, and sympathize, then they're true friends. But if even the most advanced LLM doesn't truly listen, think, or understand, if it's no more a person than the internet is, then any such relationship is just a simulation of friendship with an unconscious thing. That doesn't mean it's worthless, but it does mean it isn't what it may seem to be. Social media has already distanced us from each other by offering easy substitutes for in-person connections. LLMs add a new dimension to that, amplifying tech's power to draw us away from direct human contact. And since LLMs can be much easier to deal with than real people, they're available 24/7, they always listen, they don't break confidences, at least if they're not hacked. They don't get angry, they don't blame or shame, unless programmed to act like moral nannies, and they're not needy. In view of these attractive or flattering features, the temptation to spend quality time with an LLM rather than a real person is already pretty strong. That temptation only increases if we start thinking of LLMs as real people. Here's another concern. People who come to believe that AI truly thinks are liable also to believe it can exercise prudence and make morally good or bad choices. Naturally, they'll start to see it as a moral agent like ourselves, and come to think it deserves political rights. and not just in the already controversial way in which a corporation is considered a legal person, but in the sense that an AI should have the right against self-incrimination, the right to bear arms, the right to marry, the right to vote, eligibility for public office, protection from being legally owned by another person, and from being bought or sold as property, and other personal rights. A third worry. Those who believe AI is genuinely intelligent and who see that it can make decisions faster, more consistently, and more objectively than we can, might conclude that it's wrong for us to subject AI to human purposes at all. Once AI advances far enough, they may argue, we should honor and obey it and be governed by it. After all, isn't it for the wise to direct those who are less wise? If that sounds too outlandish to believe, remember what Larry Page called Elon Musk for endorsing the idea that AI should serve human interests. There are extremely intelligent and influential people who believe that some AI applications are, or will soon become, truly conscious, and that they should be treated as at least our equals. Another consideration. People who believe, or for the sake of profit or power pretend to believe, that an LLM is a person, deserving freedom of thought and speech, will also tend to oppose restrictions on AI research and development. And one possible result of unrestricted AI development? Some of the nightmare scenarios I mentioned earlier, like small terrorist groups wielding previously unthinkable power, could become a reality. Yet another implication. If we believe that AI literally thinks, then we also have to believe that man, not just God, can create new kinds of intelligent beings. In that case, when a new human soul comes into existence, why suppose God is involved in any special way? If a machine can think, and at least in that sense live, having an intellectual life, then the idea that man himself is nothing more than a machine becomes hard to avoid. And if we can create intelligent life, why shouldn't we see ourselves as the ultimate arbiters over questions of life and death? Finally, if an AI model is truly intelligent, and its thinking and understanding are entirely caused by its physical components, then it's living proof, or non-living proof, that thinking and willing don't require an incorporeal action or an immaterial soul. Instead, those actions would be tied to physical causes, just like the actions of walking and digesting. And if that's true, it should be equally true in our own case, which would mean that all reasons, philosophical or religious, for supposing we have immaterial souls capable of existing apart from our bodies must be wrong. On the flip side, if, no matter how advanced an AI model becomes, it can never be truly intelligent, aware, or conscious, even if it simulates and outperforms our intelligence, then that points to a fundamental, essential difference between us and AI. And whatever that difference is, it's surely something worth uncovering. In short, how we answer the question of whether AI can truly think and understand carries enormous implications for how we understand ourselves and our rightful place in the order of things. For all these reasons, it's a question very much worth raising and worth getting right. But it's not enough just to find the right answer. The case for that answer needs to be compelling enough to convince most people in the AI community, or at least some of the most influential voices, of its truth. It's also essential to present the case in a way that's accessible to the public and to policymakers. After all, it's no good if a handful of people have the right answer to this momentous question, but they can't persuade anyone else. And so humanity's relationship with AI still goes off in the wrong direction. Now, that's a tall order. So what do I propose to do in this series of 10 videos? Well, certainly what I say here is not going to be the last word on the question, but I do hope it will provide a few valuable services. First, I hope to make a strong case that AI does not truly think or understand. That's the main point of this whole series. Importantly, my thesis does not involve placing any limits on the kind of tasks AI can eventually perform. Just what that thesis is will become clearer in the upcoming videos, but at its heart, it's purely about the acts of thinking and understanding themselves, not about the production of text, images, music, movements, or similar outputs. Even if AI can eventually outperform us in all those domains, and it already does outperform most or all of us in many ways, even so, that is perfectly compatible with saying it does not truly think or understand. Second, I hope to clarify what this question really means and why it matters. I've already said a few things about why it matters, but I'll return to that topic again in the final video. Over the next couple of videos, I'll focus on what the question itself actually means. Since the question is whether AI can think and understand, I'll first try to clarify what AI means in the next video, and then what think and understand mean in the one after that. With that groundwork in place, the question should be clearly focused enough for us to start examining and assessing the various answers people have offered. Service number 3 I hope to provide is this: to present in a clear and engaging way the most notable and insightful answers others have given to the question, and to offer some assessment of their strengths and weaknesses. We'll first look at about 10 of the most commonly made or well-known arguments for the position that an AI model can truly think and understand. Then I'll offer an evaluation of those arguments. Next, we'll turn to about 9 of the best-known arguments against the view that AI is truly able to think and understand, and I'll try to assess their strengths and weaknesses as well. A fourth service I hope to render is to show how a great deal of light can be thrown on this question by 2 rather unlikely philosophers, if only we're willing to listen to them. The 2 philosophers I mean are Thomas Aquinas and Aristotle. I call them unlikely because it may seem improbable that an ancient philosopher and a medieval philosopher can help us with a modern question about artificial intelligence, given that it obviously did not exist when they were alive and philosophizing. That means they never talked about it as such. Nonetheless, as I hope to show, they provide us with a number of principles that are not easily found in the work of other philosophers and that offer illuminating answers to the question of whether artificial intelligence can really think. I will propose arguments based on those principles in videos 8 and 9. Now a word on the method adopted in this series. I've mentioned that my field is philosophy, and that I'll be consulting various philosophers as we go, so I suppose it's already clear that this video series will be taking a philosophical approach to the question of whether artificial intelligence can think. But that raises a few questions. First, what does it mean to approach the question philosophically? What does philosophy mean here? Second, why is a philosophical approach to this AI question the right approach, or at least a legitimate one? And third, why should we think that the philosophy of Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas, 2 thinkers who never even heard of AI, will prove at all helpful? Let's take the first question first. What does it mean to approach our question about artificial intelligence philosophically? Well, the word philosophy encompasses a number of different meanings, but thank goodness, we don't need to consider them all, just the one meaning that describes the sort of approach adopted in these videos. What philosophy means in this context is an understanding of things logically derived from self-evident principles grounded in human experience. I'll say that again. Philosophy, in the sense relevant here, is an understanding of things logically derived from self-evident principles grounded in human experience. That definition roughly captures how Aquinas would define scientia, the Latin word from which we get science. And so it amounts to defining philosophy in a broad sense that Aquinas would recognize, since it was his understanding that every part of philosophy is in fact a science or scientia. According to the definition I just offered, philosophy is a type of understanding. So when used in this sense, it refers to a knowledge belonging to human reason, an intellectual knowledge, not a form of perception or experience. Nonetheless, philosophy is an understanding based on human experience, insofar as it reasons from certain things, called self-evident principles, that arise out of our experience. We'll look more closely at what self-evident principles are in a moment. The definition also specifies that philosophy is not just any understanding of things. It's a reasoned understanding of things. It's logically derived from self-evident principles, which themselves are ultimately grounded in human experience. Sometimes we understand something intuitively, without any reasoning or use of logic. That's not philosophy as I've defined it here, although it may be a very useful form of knowledge or a starting point for philosophical inquiry or proof. Again, sometimes we form an understanding based on a hypothesis or an educated guess. That's not philosophy either, although it may again serve as a useful step toward it. Philosophy might begin with hypotheses or guesses, but unless it ultimately becomes an understanding that's been fully reasoned out from self-evident principles, it's not yet philosophy in the sense we're using. So, what are self-evident principles? Aquinas would call these per se nota, things known by themselves, as opposed to things known by being defined through or reasoned from something else. The Pythagorean theorem, for example, is not something per se notum. It's a conclusion that must be proved from other statements that are already known. By contrast, a self-evident statement is one whose truth can be known without reasoning or proof. Is a self-evident statement just an obvious statement then? Not quite. A self-evident statement can be obvious, but it doesn't have to be. For example, Aquinas would say that an integral whole is greater than any one of its parts is self-evident, and it's certainly obvious. The whole pizza is bigger than any one slice. Likewise, if equal things are added to equal things, the results are equal, is self-evident and also pretty obvious. Those are mathematical examples, but self-evident truths don't have to be mathematical. For example, no perfectly definite statement is both true and false at the same time and in the same respect is a self-evident truth of logic called the law of non-contradiction. And the statement that if body A moves with respect to body B, then body B moves with respect to body A is a self-evident truth of physics. And the truth of those statements is again perfectly obvious. But many self-evident truths are not immediately obvious, or at least not to everyone. For example, if a tensor has all its components equal to 0 in one coordinate system, then it has all its components equal to 0 in all coordinate systems. That's self-evident without proof to anyone familiar with tensors, but meaningless to anyone who isn't. So it's self-evident, but not universally obvious. Another example is Aquinas' metaphysical principle, whatever is received in the mode of the recipient. This is self-evident in that it's not the kind of thing that needs proving, but its meaning and truth are not obvious to everyone on first hearing. All self-evident statements are such that their truth can be grasped just by understanding the concepts involved, without needing to reason deductively from prior truths. The concepts themselves may arise from prior concepts, however. Since we don't have infinitely many concepts, all our concepts must ultimately come out of certain simple, fundamental ones that cannot themselves be based on anything prior. Those have to be our most basic concepts. According to Aquinas and Aristotle, our most basic concepts are formed naturally by our minds in response to experience, and they're shared by everyone. Concepts like thing and nothing, is and isn't, possible and impossible, one and many, same and different, before and after, whole and part, cause and effect, good and bad, motion and rest, and many others. These are thoughts, notions we all naturally form. Not all of them are equally primary, but they're all very basic, and they're common to all human minds. Not everyone has a concept of a tensor, but everyone has a concept of whole and part, because the nature of the human mind is such that, given sufficient contact with reality, it can't help but form those concepts. Of course, we can make up concepts that have no foundation in reality, or none that we know of yet. The concept of the Force in Star Wars, for example, or of a mind meld in Star Trek. But as Aquinas understood scientia or philosophia, philosophy did not operate using such fictional notions. Fiction can, but philosophy can't. Philosophy's ultimate concepts, and all its combinations of concepts in self-evident truths, must have roots in reality and in our experience of it. So, by philosophy I mean an understanding, logically derived from self-evident principles, grounded in human experience. And resting on self-evident principles does not mean all its starting points are obvious to everyone, or that philosophy itself is just a collection of self-evident truths. As Aquinas understood it, and as I will use the word, philosophy is a body of conclusions reasoned out from self-evident, but not always obvious, truths. Later, when we make and assess arguments about AI, you'll recognize the philosophical approach. We'll be reasoning from self-evident statements to their logical conclusions, or at least considering the attempts that others have made along those lines. You may have noticed that by this definition, both logic and mathematics count as parts or types of philosophy. As strange as that might sound, that's exactly right. Both Aristotle and Aquinas recognized logic as foundational to all philosophy. Aquinas even called logic rational philosophy, or the philosophy of reason, and both acknowledged mathematics as a kind of theoretical philosophy. Moreover, both mathematics and a certain sort of logic will come into play in our discussions of artificial intelligence, especially in video 7, where we're going to look at how some philosophers have used Kurt Gödel's work in mathematical logic to draw conclusions about AI. Aristotle and Aquinas themselves made little or no contribution to mathematics, but they did contribute to many philosophical sciences, including the philosophy of mathematics. Of the disciplines to which they made their most significant contributions, natural philosophy and metaphysics are the two most relevant to our question about artificial intelligence. In videos 3, 8, and 9, we'll look at a number of definitions, distinctions, and principles drawn from Thomistic natural philosophy and metaphysics, focusing on cognitive agents in general and human beings in particular. Those principles, those fundamental definitions, distinctions, and truths will form the basis of several philosophical arguments showing not only that an AI model does not truly think and understand, but also why it cannot do so. The drive to find out why something is true is also very much at the heart of philosophy, though I haven't stressed that point yet in the definition. If philosophy is a rational understanding of something, and we understand something most perfectly when we know why it's the way it is, then discovering the root causes, the why, must be an essential part of the philosophical endeavor. Aquinas and Aristotle would certainly agree. The kind of knowledge Aquinas called scientia, and that Aristotle called episteme, is not only reasoned out from self-evident principles, but also expresses the cause of the truth it has reasoned to. So a fuller definition of philosophy in this broad sense would be a causal understanding of things, logically derived from self-evident principles grounded in human experience. Now that we've covered a definition of philosophy that Aquinas would recognize, and that describes the approach this video series will use, we can move on to the second question. Why is a philosophical approach to the question, can AI think, a good approach? Why turn to philosophy to learn whether AI can truly think and understand? After all, artificial intelligence is itself a field, the field concerned with conceiving and building computers and machines to simulate human learning, understanding, recognition, reasoning, problem solving, and so on. There are plenty of experts in that field, and they would presumably be the relevant experts when it comes to many questions about AI. For example, what are the main components of a large language model? What are the stages of backpropagation? What special advantages will running AI on quantum computers make possible, assuming error correction challenges and scalability problems will eventually be overcome? Those are surely questions appropriate for AI researchers and engineers, not for philosophers, and certainly not philosophers of the non-mathematical sort, like Aristotle or Aquinas. But many questions about AI can be answered with only a general understanding of the core concepts AI experts deal with. In fact, such questions often require expertise in other fields entirely. For example, consider the following. Should AI research and development be regulated in view of economic, security, or privacy concerns? What are the potential impacts of advanced AI on the job market? Who owns the intellectual property rights to AI-generated content? Answering these doesn't require the deep technical knowledge of an AI researcher or engineer, such as a strong grasp of the mathematical and computational foundations of AI, the ability to design, implement, and optimize AI algorithms, expertise in building, training, and evaluating AI models, fluency in programming languages like Python or Java, competence in handling large data sets, theoretical knowledge of computer science and information theory, or the ability to conduct original AI research and publish in the technical literature. Those are the marks of an AI expert as such. But to answer the last three questions, you don't need that sort of expertise. You just need a general understanding of what particular AI models can do. What you do need is an expertise in other domains, like political science, economics, or law. Now, whether AI can truly think or understand is a question of this second kind. It doesn't require deep technical expertise in AI, but it does require an unusually accurate grasp of what thinking and understanding actually are. And for that, we need substantial knowledge from philosophy. Why philosophy rather than, say, cognitive neuroscience or cognitive psychology? Well, for many specific questions about thinking and understanding, those sciences are the relevant domains. If, for example, we're asking not whether an AI model can think in the same sense we do, but how closely the electrical behavior of a large language model mimics that of a human brain, then we should turn to neuroscience and psychology, not to metaphysics. But the empirical sciences, like neuroscience and psychology, rely as much as possible on external observations, even when studying ourselves, and they typically avoid making much use of our internal experiences, our first-person sense of what it's like to be conscious, to think, to understand. And yet, as I'll argue in these videos, with Aquinas' help of course, it's precisely in reflecting on our internal experience, on what we directly observe about our own acts of thinking and understanding, that we find the deepest and most decisive differences between ourselves and systems like LLMs. So, because thinking and understanding are things we only directly experience within ourselves, you can't directly experience my thoughts, nor I yours, philosophy's reflective nature, its willingness to consult our internal experience of ourselves, makes it the best suited discipline for this inquiry. In short, we're asking whether the kind of thing we find within ourselves when we reflect on our own acts of thinking and understanding is also found in an artificial intelligence. That's a question for the science of intellect, of knowledge, of what it means to know. That is, for philosophy, the most reflective of all disciplines. This doesn't mean philosophy ignores outward so-called objective experience. It just means it's also willing to make full use of our inward-facing experience. So in these videos, we'll draw on both types. That's one sign that philosophy, especially the philosophy of nature and metaphysics, isn't just relevant here, but central. Another indicator is that both AI researchers and philosophers typically agree that the question, can AI truly think and understand, is an essentially philosophical one. A further sign is that even when major figures in AI have addressed this question, they've generally written for philosophical readers, not for their technical peers. For example, Alan Turing, the famous English mathematician, cryptanalyst, and early pioneer of computer science and AI, published a landmark 1950 paper called Computing Machinery and Intelligence, in which he argued that a computer could, at least in principle, think as we do. Where did he publish that paper? Not in a journal of mathematics, computer science, AI, or cryptography, but in Mind, a leading philosophy journal from Oxford. By contrast, Turing's earlier 1936 paper on computable numbers with an application to the Entscheidungsproblem appeared in the Proceedings of the London Mathematical Society. It was written for mathematicians on a purely mathematical topic. When Turing addressed mathematical questions, he spoke to mathematicians. But when he raised our question about AI, he spoke to philosophers. A fourth sign is that the people who discuss this topic the most and publish the most on it are by and large philosophers. In fact, a vast literature in philosophy has grown up around the question. A fifth sign that our question is inherently philosophical, or perhaps a reason why it must be, is its extremely general character. We're not asking about the specific details of how one AI system works. We're not even asking whether AI has the same particular kind of intelligence that we have. Almost everyone agrees it doesn't. We're asking whether human intelligence and artificial intelligence are the same kind of thing in general. Is intelligence said of both in the same general sense of that word? Think of it this way. A circle and a square aren't the same particular kind of shape, but they're both shapes. They belong to the same general category. But a circle and the color green aren't even the same general kind of thing. They don't fall under any shared general category like shape. So when we ask how AI differs from human intelligence, we're really asking, does it differ only specifically as one type of intelligence from another, like a circle versus a square? Or does it differ generically as something that isn't even the same general kind of thing at all, like a circle versus the color green? That's the sort of question we're asking. This type of question ultimately turns on an even more general one. What are the criteria for two things being the same kind of thing in general? That's a profoundly general, abstract question. Also, as we'll see in later videos, our general question about what AI is and what our own mind is tied up with more general questions about what life is, what nature is, what a being is, what an agent is. All extremely general kinds of things. Now, to talk about the most general kinds of things belongs either exclusively or most of all to philosophy, since it's the most general of all the disciplines. In fact, when we deal with the most general kinds of things, being, non-being, cause, effect, whole, part, one, many, we're in the territory of metaphysics, the most general branch of philosophy. Why is metaphysics the most general discipline? Well, by definition, philosophy as a whole seeks to understand things by means of self-evident principles. And what metaphysics studies, among other things, is the primary self-evident principles themselves, the ones Aristotle called the axioms. We might think there isn't much to say about them, if they're truly self-evident and axiomatic. But metaphysics has its work cut out for it when it comes to the axioms. It has to investigate their types, properties, and hierarchies, and show how attempts to refute them fail. This same science, metaphysics, naturally has to make an explicit consideration of the concepts that make up the axioms, since those are like the ingredients of the axioms that determine their various properties. And these concepts composing the axioms are none other than the most fundamental concepts, such as being and non-being, whole and part, one and many, cause and effect, and so on, all of which are the most general concepts we form. In short, metaphysics studies the most general features of reality, and so it is the most general of the sciences. Therefore, because our question about AI is at bottom a very general one and immediately depends on the answers to some of the most general questions, it naturally belongs to metaphysics, and thus to philosophy. So, we now have several reasons why our question, whether AI can truly think and understand, is fundamentally a philosophical one. But we also raised a third question. How can it make any sense to turn to Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas for guidance, given that artificial intelligence never crossed their radar? Well, let me explain in a nutshell why I believe they're not only relevant, but especially well qualified to help us answer our question. It's because the most commonly used standards today for defining, detecting, and measuring intelligence do not separate our minds from AI. Unless we apply different standards, the question is already decided. AI is truly intelligent, and there's really nothing left to debate. But Aristotle and Aquinas offer deeper, more essential ways of defining understanding, ways not based on how it enables us to perform certain tasks that can be observed from the outside, but based instead on a first-person view of the very act of understanding itself. They're not the only philosophers who have worked this out well, but arguably they're the best. Without a mode of thinking like theirs, we cannot explain why an AI does not have a mind of its own. With the help of their thinking, we can. Let me expand on that. In the past, it was easy to distinguish our minds from AI by looking at our capacity to perform certain external tasks, our ability to write poetry, hold a conversation, or create works of art, for instance. But that's no longer an easy or even reliable way to tell human minds apart from existing AI. The measurable differences between current AI's capacities and ours are disappearing, or else reappearing in the form of AI superiority. In the past, we might also have thought our minds must differ because our brains are physically and materially unlike any machine. But today's AI systems are built on neural networks that in some measure imitate the structure of the human brain. And this imitation helps explain why they can perform cognitive tasks. Even if artificial neural networks remain far simpler than the human brain, and even if their way of performing computations differs considerably from biological processes that may be considered computation, we can no longer point merely to brain structure as sufficient reason to claim that we can truly think and understand while an AI cannot. So if we insist that the familiar external methods of detecting intelligence based on task performance or underlying structure are the only legitimate standards, then the question is more or less settled. AI has true intelligence, and the only remaining question is how much intelligence it has or will develop. And once we draw that conclusion, further implications follow. If an AI is truly intelligent, then arguably it's a person and deserves something like human rights, especially once we're dealing with fully embodied AI. Now, defining and measuring intelligence by external performance is the go-to method of the AI industry. That has to be its approach. It isn't possible to detect anything resembling intelligence in a machine aside from what it can be seen to do. Besides, no one will buy a system that can't do anything other than sit there and supposedly understand, while giving no outward indication of that and performing no jobs. But just because external indicators are sufficient and necessary for the industry, it does not follow that they have to be the only standards we use to think about our question. It's true, Aquinas and Aristotle never heard of artificial intelligence, but they hold the key to finding an alternative approach to the matter. Why? Because they were absolute masters at drawing philosophical inferences from the data of our internal experience, our experience of ourselves from within. To see what that means, we need to distinguish two ways we can have experience of ourselves. One way is through the kind of experience one person can have of another. Some call this objective experience, but I think that label is in some ways unfortunate because it suggests the only alternative is subjective experience, which sounds like something incommunicable, idiosyncratic, and scientifically useless. So instead, let's call it outward-facing experience, the kind we get by looking at one another, or by using tools like fMRI scans, or studying tissue samples under a microscope, or examining protein structures. It absolutely makes sense to gather as much as we can from those outward forms of experience. In anatomy, physiology, neuroscience, biology, and even experimental psychology, we capitalize on what we can learn about human nature by observing each other from the outside. But there's another kind of experience from which we can learn about human nature, the direct, first-person observation we make within ourselves, what we might call inward-facing experience. This is not just redundant with outward observation. It offers direct insights that outward experience cannot supply easily, or in some cases at all. Imagine trying to grasp the difference between imagining X is true and believing X is true just by observing other people doing the one or the other. Even if you watch their brains with fMRI, you won't directly access the inner difference between imagining and believing. You truly grasp that difference only by looking within yourself, by noticing the character of your own acts of imagining and believing and recognizing the differences between them. From examples like this, we can see that internal experience is not hopelessly subjective or private. Many features of your interior life, when you describe them to me, I can recognize in my own. You reflect on your own experience of imagining versus believing and tell me they're distinct. I then reflect on mine and discover the same difference. When we do this, we're not merely sharing feelings, we're sharing insights about common objective features of the human soul. In short, we're philosophizing together. Unlike the experimental sciences, philosophy makes full use of the data of internal experience. Some modern schools of philosophy try to imitate the experimental sciences by focusing as exclusively as possible on outward-facing experience. But that's a shame. Philosophy is supposed to draw on all human experience, and inward experience provides certain crucial, self-evident principles that can ground philosophical reasoning and that cannot be obtained otherwise. In this way, philosophical insight complements what the experimental sciences can tell us. Those sciences develop knowledge of ourselves based primarily on outward-facing experience of ourselves. Philosophy draws from inward-facing experience as well. A few philosophical schools go so far as to deny the validity of internal experience altogether, dismissing it as unreliable or folk psychology. Eliminative materialism, for instance, denies the existence of our mental states. I regard that as a kind of philosophical insanity, though there are tempting but specious reasons why some fall into it. Now, if it is true that the most essential differences between us and our machines are to be found not in outwardly observable features, but in the inner world of sensing, imagining, remembering, desiring, hoping, fearing, loving, choosing, thinking, doubting, understanding, a world we can access directly within ourselves, then we should expect the philosophers most attentive to this internal data to be the ones best positioned to help us understand just how we differ from our machines. For that reason, Aquinas and Aristotle may, in fact, be exactly the philosophers we should turn to. They were not ashamed to consult internal experience. In fact, they saw it as such an integral part of human life that they rarely felt the need to point it out as a distinct component of human experience. That doesn't mean they teach us to get in touch with ourselves and simply feel or intuit that we're somehow importantly different from other beings. No, they show that there are basic truths about what it means to think, understand, and live that are discernible through some reliance on internal experience and not without it. As I will argue, if we bring together some key premises about AI with the insights Aquinas provides about what it means to think, to understand, to be a being and an agent, we can arrive at the most satisfying answers to our question. At the very least, Aquinas and Aristotle can cast a very different and illuminating light on our inquiry, one that's missing from the accounts of philosophers who ignore or reject their methods. So much for how we're going to approach our question. Now I'll say a word about the actual content of the individual videos. That will kill two birds with one stone. Bird number one is to make it easier to follow the series as a whole. 10 videos is a lot, and if you have no idea what's coming, you might get lost in the weeds. Bird number two is to show that 10 videos is not overkill. The subject matter, the question we're asking, really does demand that kind of sustained attention if we're going to arrive at satisfying answers. Tackling the question, can machines think, doesn't require AI expertise in the technical sense I mentioned earlier. Still, some familiarity with what AI is and some general sense of how certain AI applications actually work seems necessary. Without that, the whole conversation can start to feel too abstract, too detached from the concrete facts of the case. So, for the benefit of viewers who aren't very familiar with AI, the next video will provide an overview of AI in general, and of LLMs, large language models in particular. That will be the least philosophical video, mostly reporting and describing some basics about AI and LLMs. That's one video. Then we need another to hear what Aquinas and Aristotle have to say about the nature of understanding and thinking, because only then will our question, can AI truly think and understand, take on a definite meaning. That video will also lay the groundwork for constructing Aristotelian Thomistic arguments, later on, to show why AI cannot really think or understand. Next, we'll need a video that looks at arguments in favor of the idea that AI really can think and understand, followed by another video assessing those arguments, and as I'll argue, showing where they fail. After that, we can turn our attention to some of the most famous arguments in philosophy against the idea that AI can truly think or understand, like John Searle's Chinese room. As I mentioned earlier, there will also be a whole video dedicated to arguments about AI based on the work of the Austrian mathematician Kurt Gödel, so you can look forward to that. Two more videos will explore how the principles of Aquinas and Aristotle concerning the nature of thinking, understanding, life, and cognition can provide arguments showing that no AI application can truly think or understand. Finally, the last video will step back to ask not just what AI isn't or doesn't do, but what it actually is, what it should be in relation to us, and how we should see ourselves in relation to it. Altogether, those plus this introductory one come to 10 videos. So if the contents I've described sound both relevant to the question we're asking and not easily handled in fewer than 10 videos, then 10 is not overkill. It might actually be rushing things a bit. And that's no surprise. We're not just asking about machines here. We're really talking about trying to understand human nature itself. What we really are, how we differ from other things, including things designed to simulate us in various ways. We're also asking how that difference should shape our attitude toward these simulations. Should we regard them as equals, as masters, as tools, or maybe in some entirely new way? Answers to those kinds of questions won't come from computer science, because they belong to our knowledge of ourselves. They're part of philosophy, or if you like, part of wisdom. Big tech excels at producing technology. It does not excel at producing wisdom about us or even about the tech itself. It's not in the wisdom business. That's where philosophy comes in, and I hope this video series can contribute something meaningful to philosophy's way of handling the question. All right, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.